What if the quietest towns hold the darkest secrets? In this chilling tale, a grieving stranger arrives in a forgotten Midwestern town, only to uncover a haunting curse that refuses to die. As strange signs and eerie rituals unravel, every step deeper reveals a nightmare tangled in history, loss, and something far more sinister than anyone could imagine. Brace yourself, because sometimes escaping the past is the hardest battle of all. It was just a rustling at first, like a whisper passed from root to root under the frozen ground. Sheriff Ron Halley wouldn't have noticed it at all if the cows hadn't started acting strange. One morning, just past the first snowfall, he found 5 of them gathered near the edge of the Jackson property, refusing to budge. Their breath steamed in the cold air, and their eyes were fixated on the same thing, a sinkhole that hadn't been there the night before. The hole wasn't deep, maybe 2 feet across and 3 feet down, but it stank like wet iron and rot. Ron lit a cigarette with shaking fingers and stared into it. No animal tracks, no sign of collapse. Just a ring of disturbed soil and something pale beneath the surface, curled like fingers. That same morning, halfway across the county, Pastor Eugene Fairchild stood in the cold of his churchyard in Pine Lake, Wyoming, watching 2 ravens peck at something in the frost. When he approached, they scattered. What they'd been pecking at wasn't roadkill. It was a deer's skull, bleached white, placed carefully on the church's welcome mat. Its antlers snapped and burnt at the ends. Eugene whispered a prayer he hadn't used in 20 years. Not since his grandfather told him about the 7 signs. He hadn't thought about those stories in decades. They'd been warnings passed down like gospel in their family. 7 signs before they came back. And the first? The earth opens without rain, the dead are restless. That's what his grandfather had said in 1973, back when things still howled in the woods at night. Back when people still remembered the old name of the town, Blight Hollow. Now it was Pine Lake. Cleaner, safer, civilized. But names are just shovels. They don't bury anything deep enough. The Jackson family lived on the edge of the county where the forest thickens and the roads forget to stay paved. Mae Jackson had been a local substitute teacher for nearly 20 years. Her husband Ray kept to himself, tinkering with vintage radios and fixing up tractors. Their daughter Lily was home for winter break, back from college in Billings. She'd always hated the quiet. Lily had woken that same morning with dirt under her nails and the distinct feeling that someone had been whispering into her ear while she slept. "Did you go outside last night?" Mae asked at breakfast, eyes narrowing. Lily shook her head, but her hands betrayed her. There was a scratch along her wrist, thin and fresh. Her mother noticed, but said nothing. Ray looked up from his bowl of oatmeal, his mouth twitching. He'd seen the lights again, not the aurora borealis. These were something else. Faint blue flickers hovering above the treetops, pulsing like a heartbeat. "You dream anything?" he asked Lily. "Yeah," she muttered, "but I don't think it was mine." By noon, Sheriff Halley was standing at their door. "You folks lose a cow?" he asked. Ray shook his head. "They don't wander. They avoid the woods." Ron hesitated, then nodded toward the tree line. "Might want to take a look anyhow." They walked together to the edge of the property. The air was colder here, unnaturally so. The same windless cold you get in basements no one visits anymore. When they reached the sinkhole, Ray stopped dead. "That wasn't there yesterday." "I know." Ray crouched. His breath came out fast and short. "That smell, that's blood and sage." He looked over at Ron. "You ever hear about the stories from back when this was still Blight Hollow?" "I heard enough." "You ever hear about the roots?" "No." Ray didn't answer. He just stared at the dirt, like he expected it to move. That evening, Lily sat in her childhood room, flipping through an old notebook she'd kept in high school. On the back of one page, she'd doodled a strange symbol, a circle split by a jagged line, like a lightning bolt. She didn't remember drawing it, but it gave her the same sick feeling she used to get walking past the old well on Miller's farm. When she turned off the light, The room didn't get darker. A dull glow came from outside her window. She pulled back the curtain and froze. There was a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was tall, too tall, and it was facing her window. Its arms hung unnaturally low, fingertips grazing the snow. When Lily blinked, it was gone. She backed away, heart racing, and nearly tripped over a box by the door. It had been untouched for years, but now the lid was half open inside. Old family photos, some black and white, some faded, and beneath them, a bundle of yellowed newspaper clippings. She pulled them out. The headline read, "3 found dead near Devil's Creek, no signals of animal attack." The article was dated November 7th, 1973. That was the year the town had changed its name. At the church, Pastor Eugene lit a candle he hadn't touched since seminary. It smelled of cedar and something older, something bitter. He opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Inside were notes, half-legible scribbles passed down from his grandfather. The 7 signs, drawn in blood-colored ink. The second sign was, "The Watcher returns." Taller than man, faceless under the pines, he turned to the window, heart sinking. There, beneath the bare-limbed cottonwoods, something was waiting. The sinkhole grew overnight. By morning, it was 6 feet wide and nearly as deep. Ray Jackson tied a flashlight to a rope and lowered it in. When he pulled it back up, the lens was shattered, and the beam had captured only a blur, like a face pressed too close to glass. Lily refused to come near it. Her dreams were getting worse. In them, she walked backward through a forest that whispered her name. Trees bled from their bark. Her mother stood with her back turned, humming a lullaby Lily didn't remember ever learning. The worst part wasn't the dream, it was that she woke up humming the same tune. On the 4th day, Sheriff Halley stood by his cruiser, staring at a map spread across the hood. 5 sinkholes, all within a 10-mile radius, all forming a perfect circle. Right at the center sat the abandoned Talbert farm, condemned since 1974. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did the soil. The Talbert farm wasn't marked on most maps anymore. After the fire in '74 and the missing persons case that followed, the town quietly folded the land into a protected forestry reserve. No one questioned it. No one wanted to. But Sheriff Halley had questions now. He parked at the broken gate just before dusk. The wind carried a familiar scent. Soil, burnt hair, and something faintly metallic. The house itself was just a carcass. Walls blackened by old flames. The roof half caved. No animals had claimed it. Even the vines refused to crawl too far. It was a place the forest avoided. As he stepped inside, his boots crunched over broken tiles and scorched glass. The air felt thinner here. He flicked his flashlight toward the fireplace. Something was carved into the stone. A circle, jagged down the center. He had seen that before. In Lily's notebook, he realized. Ron knelt and ran his fingers along the mark. It wasn't graffiti. The edges were too deep, too intentional, like a ritual symbol, like something meant to bind. Suddenly, he felt a presence. Not sound, not movement, just presence. Like a weight behind the eyes. He stood slowly and backed out of the house, heart thumping. Outside, something was watching him from the edge of the field. A figure. Tall. Still. Wrong. But when he blinked, it was gone. That night, Lily dug deeper into the clippings. She found a photo, faded and gray, with 5 people standing in front of the Talbert farmhouse. One of them was her grandfather, another was Pastor Eugene's grandfather, and the others, their names were scratched out, burned through, but someone had circled the faces in red pen. Below the photo, a caption read, "Founders of this circle, November 6, 1948. Lily's stomach tightened. Her hands shook as she reached into the box again. At the very bottom was a brittle envelope. Her name was written on the front in spidery cursive, but the postmark was dated 1992. She hadn't even been born yet. Inside was a single page. "They will ask you to remember, but you must forget." The circle was never broken. It was buried. We were wrong to bind him in root and salt. Now he listens through the trees again. If you hear him speak your name, don't answer. And whatever happens, never step inside the ring." There was no signature. Master Eugene woke gasping. He had dreamed of fire again. The fields burning in slow motion, the old hymns twisted backward, and a man with no face standing in the pulpit, wearing his grandfather's robes. He staggered to the window. The front lawn was marked with footprints, bare, human, but too large, too deep. They circled the church once, then vanished into the road, as if something had risen up from the earth and then walked away, dragging silence in its wake. He fell to his knees, clutching the old leather journal. The 7 signs were unfolding faster than he remembered. Maybe it was because this time there was no one left to complete the ritual. No one left who remembered the words, or maybe the circle had never worked in the first place. At the sheriff's office, Ron laid out every photo, map, and newspaper he had. The sinkholes aligned too perfectly, like clock teeth grinding against something buried too long. He called the Jacksons. No answer. Called Eugene. Busy signal. He stared again at the carved symbol from Talbert Farm. He sketched it on a napkin, held it under the desk lamp. Then he saw something he hadn't before. Faint letters scratched inside the lines. Obus Sanctum Septem. Latin. He looked it up. The Holy Seal of 7. He called the local library. The clerk hesitated, then said, "Only mention I've ever seen of that phrase was in a memoir, unpublished, handwritten, titled Blight Hollow, A Genealogy of Guilt. 1 copy, locked archive." "Author?" he asked. "Raymond Jackson?" Raymond Jackson watched her daughter Lily stand at the edge of the sinkhole. She hadn't spoken since breakfast. Her eyes looked distant, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. "Lily?" May called. "Come inside, it's getting late." Lily didn't move. She whispered something under her breath. It sounded like humming, that same lullaby from her dreams. May stepped closer. That's when she saw the faint ring forming around Lily's feet, moss curling inward, soil turning soft. A perfect circle, no wider than 5 feet. Lily didn't notice. May grabbed her daughter's arm and yanked her back just before the ring sealed shut. The moss curled inward, then sizzled. The earth inside collapsed like a mouth closing. "Jesus Christ," May whispered. "What the hell was that?" Lily's eyes were wet. "He asked me to come closer." "Who did?" But Lily couldn't say. Not because she didn't know, but because she did. That night, Ron drove back to the church. Eugene met him at the door, holding a shotgun. "Tell me I'm not going crazy," Ron said. Eugene just nodded and let him in. They sat in the back pew, candles lit. The smell of old wood and beeswax gave no comfort. "There was a ritual," Eugene said, "a real one, in 74. My grandfather was part of it. So was Ray's. So was your father." Ron blinked. "My dad? He worked at the mill. He worked nights." "But he was there," Eugene said. "They tried to trap it, deal it underground. That's what the circle was. 7 men, 7 rings, 7 names burned into the soil." "Did it work?" Eugene's voice trembled. "No, it just slept." At the Jackson home, Ray finally opened the basement. He hadn't been down there in 30 years. Dust coated the walls. The air smelled like root rot and static. Old books lined the far wall, manuals, maps, ledgers, and in the center of the floor, a burned ring. He stepped into it and felt a jolt, like his heart skipped 3 beats. He looked at the markings etched into the concrete. They weren't random. They were names. One of them was his. Another was Lily's. He dropped the flashlight. Back at the church, Eugene stood abruptly. His skin had gone pale. "The 6th sign is when blood remembers." Ron turned. "What?" Eugene pointed to the door. "And the 7th is when the earth calls you by name." Just then, the church bell rang. Neither man had touched it. Outside, the ground shook. Something old had woken, and it remembered everyone. The night the ground trembled, nobody in Harrow's End slept. A low rumble shook the quiet streets, rattling windows and stirring restless dreams. The sheriff's radio crackled with reports of strange sounds. Whispers in the wind, footsteps where none should be. Lily sat by her bedroom window, the eerie glow of the moon casting shadows over the fields beyond. The sinkhole behind Talbot Farm, dormant for decades, was throbbing faintly beneath the earth. The air tasted thick, heavy with an unseen presence. She pulled her jacket tighter, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the first star blinked hesitantly. A sound cut through the stillness. A child's laugh, distant and hollow. Her heart leapt. Had she heard it before? Down at the sheriff's station, Ron leaned over the cluttered desk, the walls adorned with photos of missing people and faded newspaper clippings. His eyes scanned the newest reports. Mrs. Callahan's dog gone missing, a light flickering at the old chapel, and the whispered rumors of shadowy figures lurking near the woods. Something's waking up, Ron muttered to himself. The phone rang abruptly, slicing through the silence. It was May Jackson. They took Tommy. Her voice was tight, trembling. Ron grabbed his coat, keys jangling as he headed out into the cold night. The Jackson house was swallowed by the dark woods, a silhouette of forgotten memories. May stood at the doorway, gripping the frame as if it might keep her grounded. Tommy was playing near the edge, she said, voice barely a whisper. Then he just disappeared. Like the earth swallowed him whole. Ron's eyes narrowed. The sinkhole? May nodded. It's been growing again, like it's alive. Outside, the wind whispered warnings through skeletal trees. Ron and May walked cautiously toward the gaping maw behind the farm. The sinkhole now a yawning wound in the earth, black and bottomless. Ron shone his flashlight into the depths. For a moment, it caught something, a faint shimmer, like a pulse beneath the surface. Then, silence. Call the search team, Ron said, voice grim. We're not leaving without that boy. At the local church, Pastor Eugene stood before his empty congregation, pacing the worn floorboards. The echoes of the night's events haunted his every step. The 7 signs, written in his grandfather's journal, had started manifesting one by one. Now, with children disappearing and strange phenomenon increasing, the prophecy was no longer a distant warning. He flipped the journal open, fingers trembling. When the earth calls by name, the cycle begins anew. His eyes fell on a passage he had never dared read aloud. The veil between worlds thins, and the watchers stir. Those who hear the call must choose, resist or become part of the ritual. Eugene's breath caught. Who was listening? Meanwhile, Lily couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. The nightmares grew more vivid. Shadows crept at the edges of her vision, and every time she passed the fields, the ground seemed to pulse beneath her feet, a heartbeat syncing with her own. Her dreams took her deeper into the forest, to a clearing surrounded by twisted trees. In the center, a circle of stones glowed faintly. She reached out, fingertips brushing the cold rock. And then, a voice whispered from the dark, "Remember." She woke gasping. Ron and the search team scoured the sinkhole's edges, using ropes and lanterns to peer into the darkness. They found torn fabric snagged on roots. Small footprints circled the hole, too large to be a child's, too human to be anything else. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the night. Everyone froze. The sound came from the woods, distant but urgent. Ron motioned for silence, heart hammering. "Stay close," he ordered. Deeper into the forest, the group stumbled upon a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. There, sprawled across the ground, was Tommy's jacket, soaked, torn, and abandoned. But Tommy was nowhere to be found. Near the jacket, strange symbols were etched into the dirt, a pattern eerily similar to the one carved into Talbot Farm's hearthstone. Ron knelt, tracing the shapes. "They're not just marks," he said. "They're warnings." Suddenly, the temperature dropped. A shadow flickered at the tree line. Eyes glowed briefly, reflecting the torchlight. "Get back!" Ron shouted. The group retreated, hearts racing. Back in town, whispers spread fast. Parents locked doors early. Children vanished from porches. The old tales of the circle, 7 men who had tried to bind something ancient and evil, were no longer just stories. May watched Lily from the kitchen window, unease knotting her stomach. "Mom," Lily whispered one evening, "I think it's coming for me." May swallowed hard. "We'll protect you, I promise." But the promise felt fragile. That night, a figure watched from the edge of the forest. A silhouette tall and still, eyes burning with an otherworldly light. The ground trembled again, and the whisper grew louder. "You cannot hide. The earth remembers." The cold bit through their jackets as the group retreated from the clearing, their breath rising in quick, misty clouds. Ron's mind raced. Those glowing eyes, the carved symbols, the chilling whispers. It was no coincidence. The darkness wasn't just creeping in, it was hunting. Back in town, the unsettling atmosphere thickened. The sheriff's office became a hub for anxious neighbors, each whispering rumors that spread faster than wildfire. Old Mrs. Connolly swore she saw a figure in a tattered cloak wandering the main street at dusk. Children's toys left outside were mysteriously overturned, and unexplained footprints appeared on porches in the morning. Lily's nightmares deepened, blurring the lines between sleep and waking. She woke, drenched in sweat, the echo of a voice still ringing in her ears, soft, urgent, begging her to remember something long buried. The forest's call was growing louder, and so was the weight on her chest, like something was clawing from beneath. May tried to shield Lily, speaking soothing words she barely believed herself. But the longer they stayed in Harrow's End, the more the town's ancient shadows seemed to seep into their lives. The stories that once seemed like myths, the circle, the ritual bindings, the curse that had haunted Talbot Farm, were now undeniable truths. Ron met with Pastor Eugene the next morning in the cramped office of the church. Eugene's hands trembled as he handed over the journal he had been safeguarding. "This isn't just history," Eugene said, voice hushed. "It's a warning. The bindings are weakening. Whatever they tried to cage is waking." Ron nodded grimly, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on him. "What do we do?" "We prepare," Eugene replied. "There are rituals, old ones, that can hold the darkness at bay, but they require sacrifices and faith." Faith was scarce in Harrow's End. That evening, the townsfolk gathered reluctantly at the church, candles flickering against the gathering gloom. Faces once familiar now etched with fear and suspicion. Whispers of ancient rites mingled with prayers. Lily sat quietly beside May, clutching her mother's hand as the pastor recited passages from the worn journal. Suddenly, the air grew thick. A low hum vibrated through the wooden beams, and the candle flames flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows. Lily's eyes snapped open, fixed on the altar where a dark shape seemed to shift. The room plunged into silence. Then a chill swept through, extinguishing every candle in an instant. Panic erupted. Outside, beneath the moonless sky, a figure moved with unnatural grace toward the farm. Its eyes, burning embers in the void, scanned the darkness, searching. At Talbot Farm, the earth cracked open once more. From the depths, a tendril of darkness coiled upward, twisting and writhing like a living shadow. The sinkhole was no longer a mere wound, it was a gateway. Lily awoke with a start, heart pounding. A sudden noise outside drew her to the window. There, across the field, a faint glow pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, syncing with her own terror. She swallowed hard, whispering, "What are you?" Ron, alongside a handful of brave volunteers, returned to the farm with torches and iron tools, hoping to seal the sinkhole before more lives were lost. But as they approached, a piercing scream echoed from the woods, a scream unlike any human voice. Ron froze, The symbols on the ground from earlier seemed to pulse with sinister energy. Suddenly, a figure emerged, half shrouded in shadow, its form shifting between human and something else entirely. Its eyes bore into Ron, filled with an ancient rage. The men stepped back, but Ron stood firm, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure hissed, voice like 1,000 whispers. "I am the price of forgotten sins, the echo of broken vows." Before Ron could react, it vanished into the night, leaving behind a lingering cold that seeped into their bones. Back in the town's library, Lily pored over old records and newspapers, desperate to understand the roots of the curse. She found accounts of the original circle, a secret brotherhood formed to trap a malevolent spirit known only as the Weaver, who thrived on fear and sacrifice. The rituals were meant to bind the Weaver beneath the earth, but every 100 years the bindings weakened, demanding renewal through a terrifying offering. Lily's fingers trembled as she read about the missing children, the strange disappearances dating back generations, each coinciding with the weakening cycle. "It's a trap," she whispered to May, "and we're caught in the middle." That night, the forest seemed alive with whispers. Lily's dreams dragged her once more into the clearing with the stone circle. This time, the stones glowed brighter, symbols burning like embers. A figure appeared, ancient and sorrowful, its eyes pleading. "Remember, the price must be paid," it intoned. Lily awoke screaming, the words echoing in her mind. As dawn broke, the town awoke to unsettling news. Tommy had been found, but not as anyone expected. He was alive, wandering near the edge of the woods, eyes vacant, skin pale as death. May rushed to his side, tears streaming, but when she tried to speak to him, he only whispered, "It's watching, it never leaves." Ron watched from a distance, worry etched across his face. The curse was no longer a story, it was their reality. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the sinkhole pulsed once more. An ominous heartbeat in the dark. The earth was remembering. The wind howled through the skeletal trees of Harrow's End, as if carrying whispered warnings from the past. A dense fog clung stubbornly to the ground, swallowing the dim glow of street lamps and turning familiar paths into mazes of uncertainty. It was the kind of night where shadows didn't just dance, they hunted. Lily stood at the edge of town, staring into the creeping mist that swallowed the Talbert farm like a hungry beast. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her. Tommy's vacant eyes, the voices in her dreams, the creeping sense that the ground beneath her feet was no longer stable. Something ancient and relentless was stirring, and time was running out. Her fingers clenched around a worn leather journal she had borrowed from the town's historical society, the fragile pages crinkling softly with every turn. The journal belonged to Elias Harrow, the man whose name the town bore, and it held more than just faded ink. It held secrets, warnings, and perhaps a chance to unravel the nightmare gripping Harrow's End. As she traced the faded symbols scrawled in the margins, a sudden chill prickled her skin. The silence was shattered by the distant crack of a branch breaking underfoot. She whipped her head toward the sound, heart pounding, but the fog had swallowed whatever it was. Alone in the eerie stillness, Lily's breath quickened. Every instinct screamed that she was being watched. Back in town, Ron and Pastor Eugene gathered a small group of trusted locals inside the creaking walls of the church. The air was thick with fear and determination. They pored over the ancient texts, seeking a ritual powerful enough to reinforce the weakening bindings that held the darkness at bay. According to Elias's journal, Eugene explained, the ritual requires the circle stones to be purified at midnight under the new moon's shadow. It's the only way to delay the awakening. Ron's jaw tightened, but we're barely halfway there. And what about the sacrifices? The journal warns that someone must pay the price. May sat silently in a corner, eyes fixed on the floor. The weight of the town's curse pressed down on her like a suffocating fog. She knew the cost all too well. As the group planned their desperate mission, Lily slipped away from the church, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. The forest beckoned, a siren call laced with dread and urgency. Every step toward the Talbert clearing felt like stepping deeper into a waking nightmare. She reached the circle of stones just as the moon slipped behind a veil of clouds, casting the world into utter darkness. The ancient symbols etched into the stones glowed faintly, pulsing with a malevolent rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. A voice, barely more than a whisper, echoed in her mind. "Remember the price." Lily's breath caught. She knelt by the largest stone, tracing the familiar carvings with trembling fingers. Suddenly, the ground beneath her vibrated, a deep rumble emanating from the earth's core. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. It was the embodiment of the curse itself, the Weaver, the ancient entity trapped beneath the soil, hungry for release. "Why do you resist?" it hissed, voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Your ancestors bound me here, but blood will break these chains." Lily swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand tall despite the terror flooding her veins. "I will not let you free." Back at the farmhouse, Ron and the others prepared for their night-long vigil. Torches flickered against the cold air, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe with a life of their own. The townsfolk gathered, their faces pale but resolute, a fragile line against the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, a scream ripped through the night, a raw, primal sound that froze everyone in place. May stumbled into the clearing, eyes wide with horror, dragging Tommy behind her. His vacant gaze was now replaced by a sinister smile that did not belong to the boy she once knew. "He's changed," she whispered, voice breaking. "The darkness, it's inside him." Ron stepped forward, heart hammering. "We have to act before it's too late." The ritual began, chants rising in the cold night air, ancient words meant to bind and banish. But as the circle's glow intensified, the earth beneath them trembled violently. The Weaver's presence grew stronger, its rage erupting in a storm of shadows that threatened to consume everything. Lily's confrontation echoed in her mind as she raced back toward the farmhouse. The town was on the brink of collapse, the lines between friend and foe blurring as the curse took hold. Faces once familiar twisted into masks of terror and fury. She burst into the clearing just as Ron was reaching the climax of the ritual, voice raised in defiance against the gathering darkness. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a desperate hope that together they might hold the line. But the ground cracked open beneath their feet, and from the abyss rose tendrils of black smoke, reaching out like hungry fingers. Lily's scream was lost in the chaos. The night swallowed them whole. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the tendrils of black smoke writhed and stretched toward the flickering circle of light. Ron's voice faltered, the ancient chant breaking against the storm of shadows that clawed to escape the earth's grip. Panic rippled through the crowd. Some turned away in terror, others stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief as the darkness crept closer. Billy's hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms, the weight of the moment crushing her spirit. She glanced at Tommy, once a bright-eyed boy, now an eerie specter of himself, his smile a cruel distortion that sent shivers crawling down her spine. But beneath that haunting mask, she still saw a flicker of the child she once knew, a fragile ember fighting to survive. The Weaver's voice echoed in the chaos, a rasping whisper that slithered through the night air. "You cannot hold me forever. Blood will break the chains, and then I shall rise." "Not tonight," Ron growled, forcing himself to keep the chant steady. "Not while we still breathe." May stepped forward, a silver dagger in hand, the only weapon they possessed capable of disrupting the curse's ritual hold. She had prepared for this moment, driven by love and desperation. Her eyes met Lily's for a brief second, a silent plea for strength, for hope. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a new scent. Something metallic, like iron mingled with earth. The crowd tensed as a low guttural growl rumbled from the shadows, the unmistakable sound of something ancient and furious awakening. From the darkness, figures began to emerge, twisted shapes, half-formed silhouettes that seemed to bleed from nightmare itself. Their eyes glowed with a cold, unnatural light, and their movements were jerky, unnatural. The cursed souls of Harrow's End, drawn to the ritual like moths to a flame. Lily stepped between the circle and the approaching shadows, heart pounding. The weight of her past, the burden of her ancestors, pressed heavily on her chest. She recalled the stories whispered in the town's dimly lit corners, tales of sacrifice and blood debt, of families torn apart by a curse older than memory. Her breath hitched as the first shadow lunged, a wailing howl piercing the night. May drove the dagger through the creature's form, light exploding in a burst that momentarily pushed back the darkness. But for every one that fell, two more took its place. "Hold the line," Ron shouted, rallying the frightened townsfolk. But their strength was waning, and the circle's glow flickered dangerously. Lily's mind raced. She had to remember. There was something in Elias Harrell's journal, a final note scrawled in frantic script that hinted at a hidden power, a way to seal the curse permanently. But the words were cryptic, a riddle wrapped in desperation. "Focus," she whispered fiercely, pulling the journal from her satchel. "There's a way, but we have to act now." Ron nodded grimly. "Tell us." As she read aloud, her voice trembling but resolute, the group listened with growing hope. The ritual required not just chants and stone, but a sacrifice of blood bound by love, a willing soul to bind the Weaver's power forever. The air thickened, charged with tension. May's gaze met Lily's again, understanding and fear reflected in her eyes. The choice was clear and devastating. "Someone has to stay inside the circle," Lily said, voice barely above a whisper. "To become the seal." No one moved. The silence was suffocating. Suddenly, Tommy stepped forward, his eerie smile fading to something softer, more human. "I'll do it," he said, voice shaky but determined. "I'm part of this. I can stop it." Lily's heart clenched. The boy she barely recognized was making the ultimate sacrifice, confronting the darkness from within. "No," she breathed. "You're not." "Lily?" Tommy interrupted. "I have to. It's my fault. I was the first to wander into the clearing. I'm the key." Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to nod. The others prepared the final chance, the circle pulsing with an otherworldly light as the sacrifice took position. The Weaver's rage boiled over, tendrils lashing out, but the circle held firm, for now. As Tommy's form began to shimmer, his features flickering between boy and something else, Lily felt a crushing mix of hope and despair. Then, without warning, the ground cracked again, wider this time, and from the depths rose a new horror. A towering figure, clad in tattered robes, its face hidden beneath a cracked porcelain mask. It was Elias Harrow himself, or what was left of him, bound eternally to the curse, an unwilling guardian twisted by centuries of torment. The townsfolk gasped, freezing in terror. The mask tilted, and a voice like grinding stone echoed across the clearing. "Do you truly think sacrifice can end this? The curse is hunger incarnate. It consumes and transforms." Lily staggered back, heart hammering. The night was far from over, and the real battle had just begun. The first light of dawn barely pierced the heavy mist that clung to Harrow's End like a shroud. Silence had returned to the town, but it was a fragile, ominous calm, one that carried the weight of countless unspoken fears. The ground where the ritual had taken place was scarred, the earth blackened and cracked as if the land itself bore the mark of some ancient wound. Lily stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath misting in the cold morning air. The sacrifice had been made, but the price was etched deeply into her soul. Tommy's absence was a void she couldn't fill, and yet the creeping shadows still lingered, a silent reminder that the curse was far from broken. She wrapped her coat tighter, her eyes scanning the dense forest beyond. The trees, gnarled and twisted, seemed to watch her with 1,000 unseen eyes. The whispers from the night before still echoed in her mind, the mask of Elias Harrow, the promise that sacrifice alone was not enough. Her thoughts were interrupted by the low hum of the town sheriff's cruiser approaching along the cracked asphalt. Sheriff Caldwell, a man weathered by years of rural isolation, stepped out with a grim expression. His face was drawn, the usual warmth replaced by a cold professionalism that unsettled even Lily. "We need to talk," he said, voice steady but urgent. "There's more to this than the ritual you performed." Inside the town hall, the air was thick with dust and silence. Caldwell pulled out a worn folder, its edges frayed from decades of use. He spread out yellowed photographs and brittled documents, evidence of disappearances, strange symbols carved into trees, and faded newspaper clippings about Harrow's Inn's dark past. "This town's history is soaked in blood and superstition," Caldwell began. "The original settlers were known for their occult practices, rituals meant to bind forces they didn't fully understand. Elias Harrow wasn't just a man. He was a figure tied to those rites, maybe even a vessel for the curse itself." Lily's heart pounded. The sheriff's words confirmed what she had feared. The darkness was not a single event, but a legacy, a sickness buried deep in the town's roots. "Why didn't anyone stop this sooner?" she asked, voice trembling. Caldwell sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Most people leave it alone. They fear what they don't understand. And those who stay, they keep the secrets buried, hoping the curse will spare them." Lily looked away, the weight of isolation settling heavily on her shoulders. The town's silence was not peace, it was complicity. Later, walking the deserted streets, she passed the old church, its once proud steeple now sagging, windows boarded and dark. Inside, faint echoes of hymns and whispered prayers seemed to linger, ghosts of a faith that had long since faltered. It was here she met May again, her eyes reflecting the same haunted resolve Lily felt. May handed her a worn leather-bound book, its cover cracked and faded. "This belonged to the church's first pastor," May explained. "He kept records of everything. Rituals, sacrifices, even warnings. If we're going to fight this, we need to understand it." As Lily flipped through the brittle pages, a chilling realization took hold. The curse was not only a force of darkness, but also a sentient presence, adapting and growing stronger with each attempt to suppress it. The past sacrifices were merely temporary delays, bandages over a wound that festered beneath the surface. Night was falling again, and with it came the return of restless shadows. Lily's mind raced as she pieced together the cryptic entries. Hidden rituals buried in forgotten corners of the forest, symbols etched in stone, the true nature of Elias Harrow's pact. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "The mask is only the beginning. Beware the watcher in the woods." A shiver ran down her spine. The curse was awakening something new, something that had watched, waited, and was ready to claim its due. Outside, beyond the town's fragile borders, the forest darkened. Eyes glowed faintly among the trees, and the wind carried a new, terrible sound. A low, guttural chant that seemed to come from the earth itself. Lily knew then that the battle was far from over. The veil between the living and the cursed was thinning, and Harrow's End was poised on the edge of oblivion. ChatGPT, the Noi. The night deepened over Harrow's End, swallowing the town in a dense blackness that seemed to press against every window pane and seep into every crevice. Lily's fingers trembled as she clutched the fragile book to her chest, the pages whispering secrets older than the town itself. May's warning echoed in her mind. The curse adapts. You can't outrun it. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of what the curse was, or of what the people of Harrow's End had become in its shadow. The air outside was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. A chill crawled up her spine as she stepped out of the dim light of the town hall and into the oppressive silence. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped, a sharp, deliberate sound in the stillness that made her heart leap. Lily's mind raced, weaving the fragments of history from the book with the sheriff's grim revelations. Elias Harrow, the man who had once wielded unspeakable power, had forged a pact not with a singular evil, but with a force that existed beyond comprehension. A force that fed on sacrifice, fear, and despair, growing stronger with each soul it consumed. Her breath caught as she recalled the cryptic message on her phone. The Watcher in the Woods. Was it a guardian of the curse, or something far worse? The idea that something unseen was stalking her made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She resolved to confront this darkness, but the question gnawed at her. How do you fight a curse that shapes itself around every attempt to stop it? Later that night, inside the weathered walls of her rented cabin on the outskirts of town, Lily spread the book open across the table. Candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally in the corners of the room. The leather binding was cracked, and the ink had faded to a haunting sepia tone, but the words remained legible. A record of a battle fought through centuries, a war that never truly ended. Among the entries, she found references to a ritual, the only known method to weaken the curse temporarily. It involved invoking the names of the original settlers and confronting the entity bound to Harrow's End with their own legacy. But the ritual came at a cost, one that had claimed many lives before. Her fingers paused over a particularly chilling passage. Beware the Watchers, those who walk unseen among the trees, for they are the eyes of the curse. See them as to invite your doom. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, howling through the trees like a chorus of lost souls. Lily felt an unnatural pressure building, a weight that pressed down on her chest and blurred her vision. Suddenly, a loud knock shattered the fragile peace. Her heart thudded painfully as she moved to the door. She hesitated, then opened it to reveal Sheriff Caldwell's pale face, streaked with dirt and sweat. "We found something," he said urgently, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What is it?" Lily asked, voice barely above a whisper. He pulled out a worn leather satchel and from it retrieved a faded photograph. It showed a group of townsfolk, dated back nearly a century. At the center was a man wearing a mask, eerily similar to the one Lily had seen during the ritual. The date on the back marked the day Elias Harrow was said to have vanished. "They were the original keepers," Caldwell explained grimly, "those who tried to contain the curse, but none survived." Lily's gaze sharpened as she traced the faces, some familiar, others ghostly strangers. Then Caldwell showed her something else, a crudely carved symbol etched into the wooden frame of the photo, the same symbol that had appeared in her dreams and on the trees around the clearing. "It's a warning," he said, "or a curse." The weight of the revelation pressed down on Lily, yet it sparked something fierce within her, a resolve to break the cycle. As Caldwell left to gather more evidence, Lily turned back to the book, searching desperately for any hint of salvation. Hours later, exhausted and sleep-deprived, she heard the faintest whisper of footsteps outside. Her breath caught. She wasn't alone. Peering through the window, she glimpsed a figure standing just beyond the tree line. The shape was indistinct, but the glint of eyes reflecting moonlight sent a jolt of terror through her. Then, as if aware of her gaze, the figure vanished into the darkness, leaving only the echo of silence. Lily's hands trembled as she realized the Watchers were no longer just stories. They were real, and they were coming for her. The night held its breath, waiting for the next move in this deadly game. The cold was relentless that morning, a biting chill sweeping through the skeletal branches of the Appalachians as dawn barely crept over the horizon. Lily pulled her coat tighter, the fabric doing little to shield her from the creeping frost that seemed to penetrate the very marrow of her bones. The weight of the leather-bound tome felt heavier in her satchel, its secrets pressing upon her with every step she took toward the old church at the edge of Harrow's End. This wasn't just a building, it was a monument to the town's forgotten sins, its crumbling walls echoing with prayers and curses alike. The scent of mildew and burned candle wax clung to the air, mingling with the distant, sorrowful cry of a lone raven. Lily hesitated at the threshold, the heavy oak doors groaning as she pushed them open, revealing a dim sanctuary bathed in shadow and the muted glow of stained glass. Inside, the pews were empty, save for a figure hunched over the altar. Father O'Connell. His presence was both a balm and a warning. His eyes, shadowed by weariness, flicked up as she entered. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, voice gravelly but urgent. "I need answers," Lily replied, her own voice barely steady. about the curse, about what this town really is. Father O'Connell sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as if to erase years of torment etched into his skin. You've stirred forces better left sleeping. The rituals, the sacrifices, they were meant to keep the darkness at bay. But the curse, it's older than any of us. It feeds on fear and doubt, and it's growing stronger. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. Is there a way to stop it, to end this nightmare? He looked at her then, his eyes heavy with the weight of unspeakable truths. There is a ritual, yes, but it demands a price: blood, sacrifice, and the willingness to face the entity in its own realm. The mention of sacrifice twisted in Lily's gut, but she nodded. She had no choice. Father O'Connell led her to a small side chapel, its walls lined with ancient symbols carved deep into the stone. This is where the original keepers performed the binding. They were the ones who first tried to cage the darkness. Their failure, well, it's written in the blood of this town. As he spoke, Lily's mind raced back to the photograph Caldwell had shown her. Those lost keepers, faces frozen in time, shadows of a doomed legacy. "I've found something else," she said, pulling out the worn book from her bag. "A clue in this journal. It speaks of a place. The Hollow." "The Hollow," Father O'Connell whispered, lips pale. "A place of power and dread, deep in the woods. Few who enter ever return." Determination ignited within her. "I have to go there. If that's where the curse began, it might be where it can be ended." Father O'Connell's gaze held hers a long moment before he nodded. "Then you'll need help. This journey, it's not meant for one." As they made plans, a faint scratching sound echoed from the chapel door. Lily's blood ran cold. Turning, she saw nothing but shadows stretching long in the flickering candlelight. Outside, the town remained eerily silent, the morning mist curling like ghostly fingers through the empty streets. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a low, guttural growl disturbed the stillness. A reminder that whatever lurked in the dark was watching, waiting. Lily's resolve hardened. This was no longer just a fight for her own survival. It was a battle for the soul of Harrow's End. Chat GBT Denoy. The sun dipped low behind the twisted pines as Lily and Father O'Connell prepared their gear for the journey into the Hollow. The church's cramped storage room was filled with an uneasy mix of ancient relics and modern survival supplies. Salt, iron knives, candles, and a dusty bottle of holy water resting beside a first aid kit and a GPS device. The incongruity of old and new seemed to underscore the fragile line between the world they knew and the one that awaited them. Lily's fingers trembled slightly as she packed the book of rituals into her bag. Every page held a fragment of the town's dark history, but also a fragile hope. A way to break the cycle. Yet even as she stared at the faded ink and cryptic symbols, a creeping doubt gnawed at her mind. How many before her had failed? How many had vanished into that cursed forest, swallowed by the darkness without a trace? Father O'Connell caught her hesitation and offered a grim smile. "Fear is natural. It's the only thing that's kept the curse contained this long." A sudden knock at the door startled them both. The sheriff's deputy, Tom Ellis, stepped inside, his usual stoic expression shadowed by exhaustion. "We've been hearing things. Strange sounds near the forest edge. Some folks are too scared to go home after dark. The town's on edge," he said, voice low. "You really think this ritual will work?" Father O'Connell nodded solemnly. "It's our last hope, but it will take more than prayer and faith." Lily looked at Tom. "Will you come with us? We'll need someone who knows the land, someone who can watch our backs." Tom hesitated only a moment before agreeing. "I'm no stranger to this town's secrets. I'll help, but be warned. The Hollow has a way of twisting the mind, showing you things you don't want to see." With the uneasy alliance formed, the small group stepped out into the chilling dusk, the air thick with anticipation and unseen threats. As they approached the forest, the last vestiges of daylight slipped away, replaced by a creeping darkness that seemed to swallow the world whole. The forest greeted them with an unnatural stillness. No wind rustled the leaves. No animal stirred. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on the frost-hardened earth. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, shapes twisting and receding whenever anyone dared to look directly. Lily's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. The air smelled faintly of decay and smoke, an ancient scent that seemed to seep from the soil itself. She clutched the book tightly, reciting silent prayers under her breath. Hours passed as they ventured deeper. The path grew narrower, overgrown with thorny briars that seemed to claw at their clothes. Strange symbols etched into tree bark appeared sporadically, glowing faintly in the moonlight. A language neither Lily nor Tom recognized, but one that chilled them nonetheless. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. Tom dropped to a crouch, signaling the others to stay alert. The sound came again, closer this time. Unearthly, fractured, as if the forest itself was crying out in agony. They pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the hollow. At last they stumbled upon a clearing bathed in cold moonlight. In its center stood a weathered stone altar, stained dark with what looked like dried blood. Surrounding it were scattered bones, some bleached white, others fresh and ominous. Lily approached cautiously, the weight of history pressing down on her. Topper glanced up, raised a brow, and peered about. As she reached out to touch the altar, a sudden gust of frigid wind whipped through the clearing, carrying whispers. Low, guttural voices that seemed to speak in tongues, older than time. Father O'Connell began chanting softly, the ancient words rolling off his tongue like a protective shield. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the shadows around them thickened into shapes. Twisted figures with hollow eyes and snarling mouths. The entity had awakened. Panic surged through the group as the creatures lunged forward. Tom fired his flashlight beam wildly, trying to keep the shadows at bay. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she clutched the ritual book, flipping to the incantation they hoped would bind the darkness once more. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows. A woman draped in tattered white, her eyes voids of endless sorrow and rage. Her voice echoed through the clearing, chilling yet hauntingly melodic. "You dare disturb the sacred balance," she whispered. "The curse is eternal. It feeds on the living and the damned alike." Lily's blood ran cold as the woman's gaze locked onto hers. The forest seemed to close in, suffocating, as the ritual began to unravel before their eyes. The last thing Lily saw before darkness claimed her was the altar cracking, tendrils of shadow creeping out like serpents, reaching for their souls. The night was unnervingly silent, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Lily awoke to the faintest whisper of wind slipping through the cracked window of the abandoned cabin where they had taken refuge. Her skin prickled with a cold she couldn't shake, and the uneasy feeling crawling under her ribs told her that whatever nightmare they had faced was far from over. Outside, the moon hung low and swollen, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and writhe with a life of their own. The world felt distorted, like the line between reality and nightmare had blurred irrevocably. Lily rose slowly, careful not to wake Father O'Connell or Tom, who were huddled on the other side of the room, their faces pale and drawn. The weight of the ritual book in her hands was heavier than ever, burdened not only with ancient incantations but with the knowledge that the true horror was still lurking, waiting. They had barely survived the assault at the altar, but the curse had not been broken. It had only been momentarily stalled. Her mind replayed the woman's voice, an echo of anguish and menace. "The curse is eternal. It feeds on the living and the damned alike." Those words clung to her like a suffocating fog. What did it truly mean? Was the curse a force beyond human control? Or was there still a way to end the nightmare? Determined, Lily grabbed a worn flashlight and stepped out into the chill night air. The forest loomed around them, dark, oppressive, a labyrinth of twisted branches and creeping shadows. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper of danger. Their goal was clear: to find the source of the curse and end it before it consumed what remained of their town. As she moved deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Her steps faltered when she noticed fresh footprints. Large, uneven, like claws dragging through the mud, they led toward an ancient gnarled tree at the center of the forest. its bark blackened as if burnt, and its roots twisted grotesquely above the ground. This was the place, the heart of the hollow. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine. The air shimmered, and before her eyes, the tree seemed to pulse, alive with a dark energy that rippled like waves. Shadows writhed along its trunk, forming faces contorted in silent screams. Lily swallowed hard and stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the bark. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the world tilted. Visions exploded in her mind, flashes of the town's past, of sacrifices made in desperation, of lives lost and sins buried beneath the soil. She saw the original settlers, bound by fear and superstition, who had tried to contain the darkness with rituals that had only fueled its wrath. She saw the blood spilled on that very tree, the cries of the condemned echoing through the centuries. But then, a glimmer of hope. A faint, flickering light within the darkness, the spirit of a child, pure and untouched by the curse, trapped and yearning for release. Tears blurred Lily's vision. This was why the curse persisted. It was a prison, fueled by pain and sorrow, needing redemption. A sudden movement snapped her out of the trance. From the shadows emerged a woman in white, her sorrowful eyes now burning with fierce determination. "You seek to end what binds us all," the woman said, voice steady, "but the price is steep. Are you willing to pay it?" Lily's heart pounded, but she nodded. "I have to try. For the town, for the innocent trapped here." The woman extended a hand and Lily took it without hesitation. Together, they began the ritual. A weaving of ancient words and modern courage, a dance between light and darkness. As the first rays of dawn pierced the canopy, the forest trembled once more. The curse fought back, but this time there was resistance. Lily felt the burden of centuries lift slowly, the oppressive weight easing as the dark energy retreated into the earth. But as the sun rose, casting golden light over the hollow, Lily knew this was not the end. The curse might be weakened, but its shadow would linger, a silent warning that some darkness never truly dies. She turned back toward the cabin, her steps heavy but resolute. The battle had changed her, and the town, but the story was far from over. The first light of dawn was a fragile promise, barely piercing the oppressive gloom that still clung to the edges of the hollow. Lily stood outside the cabin, the ritual's echo lingering in her bones like a fading heartbeat. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on the town and its people seemed lighter now, but she knew better than to trust the dawn too soon. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the torn pages of the ritual book, its ink smudged and fragile. She had seen the curse's heart, an ancient wound bleeding through generations, and she had fought to bind it, but victory felt incomplete. The spirit of the child had been freed, yes, but the darkness that fed on fear and pain remained, lurking, waiting. Inside the cabin, Tom and Father O'Connell stirred awake. Their faces showed exhaustion, yet beneath it was a spark of cautious hope. Lily's voice, though hoarse, carried conviction as she recounted the vision at the tree, the sacrifice made, and the fragile peace they had won. "We did something last night," she said quietly, "but it's not over. The curse, it's part of this land, part of us now. We've only put a lid on it." Father O'Connell nodded solemnly. "Evil never truly dies. It only waits for the right moment. We've bought time, but what comes next will be the true test." Lily paced, mind racing through the fragments of folklore, the whispered warnings of the townsfolk, and the forbidden histories buried deep in county records. The curse was more than a simple haunting, it was a ritual, a cycle of pain tied to human sin and desperation. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp rap at the cabin door. Heart pounding, she opened it to find Sheriff Daniels, his face grim. "We found something," he said without preamble, stepping inside. "Down by the river, another body. Same signs as before." Lily's breath caught. Another victim meant the curse's hold was far from broken. Outside, a cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a faint whisper, almost a sigh. Together, they followed the sheriff to the river bank, where the mist clung low over the water. The body was partially submerged, pale and twisted in unnatural angles. The eyes were wide open, empty of life but filled with a chilling terror. As they stood in the early morning chill, a flicker of movement caught Lily's eye, a shadow slipping between the trees, faster than any human could move. She blinked, but it was gone. "We're not alone," she murmured. Sheriff Daniels frowned. The town's edge has always been a place of stories and warnings. Maybe those stories were true after all. Lily's mind spiraled back to the warnings etched into the walls of the old church. The tales of settlers who tried and failed to break the curse. The rituals that demanded sacrifices. "Every step we take," she said, voice tight, "we risk pulling the darkness closer, but we can't stop now." As the days stretched on, the trio delved deeper into the county archives, unearthing old newspaper clippings, diaries, and faded photographs. Each document painted a portrait of a town slowly consumed by its own secrets, disappearances, unexplained deaths, and cryptic symbols scrawled in the margins. A chilling pattern emerged. The curse was cyclical, awakening every few decades, feeding on fear, pain, and blood. By evening, the oppressive silence returned. The townspeople retreated behind locked doors, whispers of dread spreading like wildfire. Lily stood alone at the edge of the forest, the setting sun bleeding red across the sky. The ritual had changed something, yes, but the curse's appetite was far from sated. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. The screen displayed a single chilling phrase: "The true darkness has only just begun." She swallowed hard, the cold creeping deeper into her bones. Behind her, the trees rustled, not with wind, but with something alive, watching. Lily's eyes darted into the growing shadows as a guttural whisper slipped from between the branches, a voice both ancient and malevolent. And then, silence. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey through the shadows of the Hollow. I hope this story gave you the shivers, the suspense, and the eerie thrill that only a true American horror tale can deliver. If you enjoyed this deep dive into folklore, curses, and the supernatural, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming horror stories. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories alive and lets me share more spine-tingling legends with all of you. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters aren't just in the dark. They're the secrets we bury, the curses we inherit, and the stories we dare to tell. Stay safe, stay curious, and until next time, keep your eyes open, because you never know what's lurking just beyond the shadows. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.